Hey everyone, it feels like it's been a little longer than usual. I'll talk a little about where I've been at the end of the video. In the meantime, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, consider subscribing if you're new, and maybe like my Facebook page, follow my Twitter, or tip me a coffee over at my coffee account here. Okay, enough of that. Let's get into it. When the RE2 remake dropped in 2019, it wasn't exactly high on my priority list of games. I'm not opposed in any way to remakes, providing they're pieces of artistic expression first and cash grabs second. I'm also glad that younger generations are getting the same chances I had to experience the same game worlds and stories I explored in my youth, just in their own way. So it wasn't until visiting my local barcade here in Nagoya of a quiet evening that I actually spent a little time playing around with this and quickly discovered my new favourite way to experience this story. Sure, it doesn't have a true A-B scenario this time, but I was met with both a game and a story that felt at once familiar and also brand new all at the same time, and had the pleasure of experiencing this adventure for the first time all over again. Given what an incredible job Capcom did paying homage to its original creation, while updating it in all the ways that mattered, it's no mystery at all why this game was such a big hit with both existing fans and newcomers to the series alike. So when something is wildly successful like RE2 and, to a lesser extent, RE3 Remake, it's no surprise at all that creatively bankrupt people like EA executives will glom onto the idea and try to reproduce it for their own slice of that success. Given, however, the standard that Capcom had set with their game, whatever EA commissioned couldn't be their usual factory-produced soulless output with a marketplace conveniently strapped to it that lets you pay to have them play the game for you as well. They were going to need to wow fans of the original as well as capture the hearts of new players alike, and they'd need to exploit new technology in such a way as to justify the existence of this remake, or just get laughed out of the room for blatantly copying Capcom and completely missing the point of what had made those games successful. In that regard, it was to absolutely no one's surprise that EA announced they had a studio working on a remake of their massively popular 2008 space horror game, Dead Space. This IP, created by EA Redwood Shores, who later went on to rename themselves Visceral Games, exploded onto the scene at its arrival, took the world by storm, and proceeded to fade from relevance as EA asserted more control over it, mandated the game follow popular trends rather than pursue its own incredibly strong identity, before shutting the studio down when, thanks to their meddling, Dead Space 3 received an overall lackluster reception, underperformed, and the executives who'd made all the mistakes decided that the studio needed to be sacrificed to protect their oh-so-precious bottom line. Make no mistake, I loathe EA, and it truly pains me to even acknowledge their existence on my channel, but here we are. Back when it came out, I gave the original Dead Space a hard pass, and I actually couldn't remember why until I took a look at what else came out that year. Oh, now I get it. Actually, this was the period in my life post-graduation, where I'd moved into a shared home with my then girlfriend and her friends. I'd taken the first job that said yes to help me make up my side of the rent and bills, and since it wasn't even full-time, I wasn't exactly rolling in disposable income. The other side of it is that I was more into this. Oh, and magic. As in conjuring, not the game. I had aspirations at the time to go into business with a friend of mine as professional magicians, and I just wasn't gaming as much as I used to. As such, a lot of that era of games just passed me by. Which brings me to 2023 and the release of Dead Space Remake. Not long prior to this, the Callisto Protocol, a spiritual successor to Dead Space, made by the original leads, had been released to lackluster reviews, citing everything from repetitive gameplay to terrible PC performance as the reason for this. So there was a lot of attention on Dead Space when it came out, and if my buddy Jared over at Avalanche is anything to go by,
I mean, this really is the new bar that other remakes are going to have to clear moving forward.
It was a hell of a hit. So with winter bringing my usual craving for horror games, I decided to axe Starfield from my Christmas list, at least until it's pulled a real No Man's Sky, and take my first ever journey to the USG Ishimura and finally see what all the fuss was about. So, let's set phases to dismember and get to work purging the place of Necromorphs. This is Dead Space Remake. Okay, so a little housekeeping first before we move forward. As mentioned in the intro, prior to playing Dead Space Remake over the 2023 Christmas season, I'd never played a Dead Space game. As such, all of my impressions of the gameplay and presentation that have been written were done without any first-hand knowledge of the original. However, after finishing those sections, I went on to record several hours of gameplay of the original to get my impressions for the later comparison section and to use in this part of the video too. So please don't rush on down to the comments to start complaining about my lack of journalistic integrity here because, let's be honest, what game reviewer has any of that? Dead Space was made originally by EA Redwood Shores and helmed by visionary Glenn Schofield. Prior to his work here, Glenn had been vice president of a little-known game company called Crystal Dynamics, where he oversaw the development of a super niche and mostly unknown vampire game series called The Legacy of Kain.
Oh no. Every time you turn up, something monumental and terrible happens.
Prior to making Dead Space, Redwood Shores' portfolio consisted of mostly licensed games, such as 007 Agent Under Fire, which is, might I add, one of my favorite PlayStation 2 shooters, and the 1998 title Future Cop LAPD. The game that would become Dead Space was on some level conceived as a System Shock 3, but at that time EA, already a creatively bankrupt corporate entity that had grown bloated from selling texture updates for sports sims as new games every year, weren't interested in making any original IPs. All that changed in 2005 when...
Marvelous! Look! It's Unicron!
No, not that. Rodimus Prime saved us from that. I'm talking about this. EA executives may not care a whit for art, storytelling, or humanity in general, but you can bet your ass they are down to chase a potential boatload of money. So in early 2006, when Schofield repackaged their System Shock 3 idea as something more like Resident Evil 4 in space, they were given 3 months to get a prototype ready and... Actually, can we just take a minute here to let that sink in? Dead Space was pitched in early 2006. They spent 3 months just making a slice to show to their publishers before getting a green light, and then they released in October 2008. How wild is that? Meanwhile, Starfield's development lasted 8 years, and the sum total output of it is... low-hanging fruit. Okay, I'm joking. I haven't even played Starfield, so what the hell do I know, right? The success of Dead Space is one of many stunning examples of why EA executives are wrong about everything ever. It was an original IP that was created and internally promoted in a way that was counter to everything EA believed and wanted us to believe about games at the time. It was the Jedi Fallen Order of its day. It was a passion project put together by people who loved games and wanted to make something that would leave a lasting impact on the world, and not a soulless grind designed to wear you down until you just buy the cheats from the marketplace. Given that the success of a Resident Evil game was the catalyst for getting Dead Space made, it should come as no surprise at all to anyone that the success of another Resident Evil game is what got Dead Space Remake greenlit. With EA Redwood Shores transformed into Visceral Games, and later sacrificed on the altar of their shareholders, and Glenn Schofield working on other projects, I might give this a try now, you know. Development was handed over to Motive Studios, whose list of accolades include one Star Wars game that broke the internet with its bullshit, and one that was really well received but still isn't a patch on Star Wars Arcade on the 32X. Oh yeah, this is the good stuff. EA announced the remake in 2021, and many of the lead staff on the project were veterans of the series. Much like with RE2 and 3 makes, this was a ground-up rebuilding of everything, but in the Frostbite engine. If those words make you shudder, well, they should. It's a notoriously difficult engine to work with, but maybe things have changed since BioWare had it dumped on their lap and were told to stop making story-rich RPGs that everybody loved, and use this to shove out a soulless live service that nobody asked for. It's also possible that developers are just better at working with it now, but it's a name that sends a chill up my spine. Either way, in January 2023, following the lackluster reception of the Callisto Protocol, and at the start of one of gaming's greatest years, Dead Space Remake came out of the gate and said, "Here's the bar for the year, motherfuckers. Come at me." And oh boy, did they set that bar high. So before we begin, I will say I'll, as usual, be doing my best to keep spoilers confined to the end of the video. That being said, I would also like to say that if you are one of those rare few people like I was, who hasn't played any games in this series and largely steered clear of any media concerning them, and you think this remake might be something you want to try out for yourself, then I can 100% guarantee you that it's an amazing time, and between your first experience and no doubt numerous replays, you will absolutely get your money's worth out of this. In that case, I strongly recommend closing this video right here, going to play the game for yourself with little to no idea of what you're getting yourself in for, and just have as wild a time figuring it all out as I did. Don't worry, this video will be here when you get back, and I can promise you, you won't regret it. Okay, you back? I was right, wasn't I? No need to thank me. Dead Space opens on what initially looks like grainy CRT footage of a handsome looking woman seemingly pouring her heart out to someone named Isaac. It seems they've been far apart for a long time and some bad words were exchanged at some point. Still, even with the little we know about what's to come, it's easy to infer alternate meanings from this. The camera pulls back to reveal our protagonist Isaac, who's watching this on some kind of holographic projector, and we get our establishing shot of the bridge of the USG Ishimura and see our cast revealed in full. A couple of these guys aren't going to be sticking around all that long, but I'd like to introduce Kendra Daniels, the computer specialist, and our absolute best boy and all-around Giga Chad, who I would love to go out with for a heavy deadlift session followed by drinks at the protein bar, Security Chief Zach Hammond. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but these two are the guys we'll be spending most of our time with. And in this very brief intro, thanks to great writing, voice acting, and facial capture, we are able to get a sense of their personalities.
I don't blame you. I'd listen to my girlfriend over Hammond reciting security protocols.
Forewarned is forearmed, Miss Davis.
So you keep saying.
See some strained working relationships.
No chances, huh? Is that why you were digging into my personnel files before we left?
You track your file access?
I'm a computer analyst. Comes with the job.
And even a little moment of human empathy.
Sounds like their communication array is busted. Maybe a broken encoder. Daniels and I can handle it in 48 hours, max.
Hey, that gives you plenty of time to catch up with Nicole.
This really is how you introduce and endear characters to your audience. It really doesn't take that much. Believe it or not, being genuine is just as likable in fiction as it is in reality. Not whatever the fuck this is.
Yeah, okay, that is something I do now. I do magic, talk to sentient cuffs, kill jacked up beasts. You know what? I'll probably fly next.
Now you're just being ridiculous.
Okay. That's the last low-hanging fruit I'll grab in this video. I swear. Well, maybe 2 or 3 more, but then that's it. So our team is coming up on the planet Aegis 7, where they've been called out to do emergency repairs on the USG Ishimura, a deep space mining ship known as a planet cracker. This absolute titan of a machine can drill into and lift the core right out of a planet to harvest it for mineral resources, and wow, do I have some opinions about the level of entitlement on display here. You know what? Fuck it. This version of humanity had it coming. I'm out. Games are an artistic medium, and art reflects life, and is supposed to make us ask questions of our own views and consider the views of others as part of a personal journey of self-discovery. And what better way is there to do that than by literally looking through the eyes of another person and taking on their role? Okay, fine. So approaching the Ishimura, What was assumed at one point to be just a communications blackout in need of an extra deep space handyman soon reveals itself to be more serious when we see the Ishimura seems to be running completely dark, and things go from bad to worse very quickly when the docking procedure...
I'm losing control.
So with communications still down, and nothing resembling a red carpet being rolled out to greet them, Zack, Kendra, this poor guy here named Chen, and our hero tool up and head out to figure out what the hell happened here. With that, Isaac dons his iconic helmet, a symbolic act that grants us full control of the character, and our journey into the dark finally begins. This opening is the closest we get to being pushed around by the devs, as the game has yet to unlock the running controls. But that's fine because the Ishimura is one hell of a spectacle. While there's clearly a working atmosphere, it's oddly quiet, and stepping through the door from the hangar to the interior only escalates the tension, as we are still yet to be met by anyone, and something just feels really off here. While I would have liked this section to stretch out just a little longer, maybe send Isaac off by himself before things get shaken up, the payoff here is immense when the alarms start blaring, Isaac and the others find themselves trapped on different sides of a quarantine door, and all hell breaks loose. We get this awesome mad dash escape as what looks like mutated corpses pile out of the vents, and all we can do is run for our lives. Finally escaping to a moment of peace, we find the most important tool in any space engineer's arsenal, a plasma cutter. And the most important memo we are ever going to receive in our entire life. Thus begins Isaac's worst day on the job, as he is tasked with surgically dismembering what were once human beings, desperately trying to keep a ship that was designed to house over 1,000 people and store tons upon tons of ore together by himself, all while trying to find some way to get himself, his crewmates, and hopefully, if she's alive, his girlfriend to safety, and maybe uncover a conspiracy centered on an incredibly influential religion with a less than healthy fixation on death and what supposedly comes after that. Actually, in that regard, I'd say what they believe is about as messed up as what most of the world's religions believe, but the others at least have the decency to keep all that stuff to hypothetical other realities, and don't go about infesting spaceships with it. Well, there was that one incident on Mars one time. Anyway, so with our setup established, why don't we dive a little more into the lore and all that technical gameplay stuff before we charge deep into spoiler land and try to make some sense of this cursed universe in which we found ourselves. Our journey across, through, and around the USG Ishimura is a hell of a visual spectacle in Dead Space Remake. Not just in terms of graphics, but in just how much of the game's story is told by looking around you. Of course, there's more overt stuff, such as text logs and audio files, similar to what you might come across in an immersive sim like Bioshock or Prey 2017. These give us little snippets of information that slowly unravels the mystery of how this ship's crew became some kind of infectious walking dead. But there's also slightly more subtle hints, well, maybe not that subtle, of what happened written in the world all around you. From hastily made barricades and mangled corpses, to all kinds of graffiti scrawled or scratched into the walls, to the actions of the few seemingly alive humans that are left on the station. All of this gives us an idea of what it was like to be on a ship besieged by monsters, while the crew desperately tried to hold the line. Far from being in a pitched battle though, these people were hunted and picked off one member after another, with each casualty strengthening the enemy's ranks. Seeing David, who you used to sit across from in the mess hall, and who only yesterday was helping you carry supplies back to your safe house, now mutated and charging down a darkened metal hallway at you intent on ending your life, is going to take a hell of a mental toll on anyone. But more so, it's very clear that something else is at play here. It seems all the crew were experiencing hallucinations of one kind or another, And even the few, mostly rational members we come across aren't exactly flying around on the same starship as the rest of us. All this seemed to start when the miners down on the surface of Aegis 7 found something and brought it on board. This something is a seemingly alien artifact known as the Red Marker. And if you're wondering what in the world would possess any rational-minded person to bring something of seemingly alien origin into a pressurized enclosed atmosphere like a starship without any idea of what it might do to all the people on board, well... so I guess we're doing this again, huh? The heavyweights of the PS1 era horror games are without a doubt Silent Hill and Resident Evil. The original Silent Hill deals with the machinations of a cult that did very horrible things to an innocent girl in order to try and birth their god, and bring about their so-called paradise on Earth. Meanwhile, Resident Evil deals with pharmaceutical research that crosses well over the line into immoral and exploitative realms as scientists, in a bid to improve humanity, and also package and sell that improvement as a product, create horrific mutations that go about destroying their creators and everyone else around them. The literary equivalent of Resident Evil might be something like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, while Silent Hill may stray into areas of Lovecraft and the various cults found therein. While one opts for science bad and the other puts forward religion as the enemy, they both share a point about fanaticism. That is to say, a point at which the ideology takes precedence over basic human decency, or where the ends are held up to justify any means, no matter how horrific. This more human side of the horror presents us with relatable enemies, be it the fanatical Dahlia Gillespie or Claudia in the third game, the obsessed Albert Wesker, or the likes of Mother Miranda. These are people we can hate rather than fear. Monsters, in the end, are only doing what it is in their nature to do. Even Doom's demons, for all their cruelty, don't really have a choice in how they conduct themselves. Humans, though, we should know better. I can't hate a xenomorph for wanting to breed with me. I'm actually kind of flattered, maybe even a little curious. But I could pound Burke's stupid corpo face until there was nothing but bloody mush left. So Dead Space smashes both the religious fanatic and the evil doctor together into one person and gives us Dr. Chalice Mercer.
Your fugitive's name is Dr. Richard Kimball.
Mercer, the captain, and indeed a large number of the crew of the USG Ishimura, are members of a religious group called Unitology. Unitology is something that somewhat resembles modern-day Scientology here in the real world, and espouses that humanity is in fact a construct of an alien race, and that our finite lives are only a stepping stone to a much greater life that begins after we die, wherein we will be reborn and made whole through an event called convergence. Now, in terms of religious beliefs, this one is about as nonsensical as basically any of them, but Unitology has a little seemingly backing it up. You see, if you dive into the Dead Space lore, you'll know that this religion formed when an alien artifact was discovered secretly on Earth, and the religious leader Michael Altman had his head filled with visions from it and proceeded to break his NDA on the matter and preach this new great truth to the world. He promptly became Unitology's first martyr when he was silenced by his former employers for good, but the seed was already planted and things spread like wildfire from there. And if you're thinking it's kind of odd that a ship staffed with mostly Unitologists happen to stumble upon another alien marker that can fill people's heads with hallucinations, well, you won't be surprised to hear that this is no accident. Unitology is a very financially powerful institution and owns a lot of shares in CEC, who own the large piece of metal we are stomping around. There's nothing coincidental about this at all. Unitology is a religion with all the red flags. They are very evangelical, and members weave the ideology into their identity. What this means is that asking what seems like logical questions to anyone outside the group is something taken as a personal insult to members of the group. Children born into Unitologist families aren't going to have any say in the matter either. They are going to have the ideology shoved down their throats and exist in a community of people who accept it without question, and consider those who don't to be outsiders. This makes leaving very hard, because when all your friends and family are constantly sucking down the Kool-Aid, the prospect of walking away from the comfort of your own tight-knit community, and a vision of the universe that places you as special and cared for at every stage of your existence, is going to be really scary and very difficult. especially when doubt is policed with the utmost prejudice. This is actually something personal to Isaac, whose mother was a unitologist, and we later discover killed herself after trying to escape them, and whose current girlfriend, who we're also desperately trying to find, is a neuropsychiatrist who actually specialized in helping people leave unitology. She wasn't very popular on the ship.
But frankly, this vendetta against Dr. Mercer just sounds like more of your bigotry.
My what?
Do you deny that you've counseled members of our church and turned them against unitology?
Now, the actions of the unitologists here on the Ishimura are no doubt influenced by the red marker, and I'm honestly not sure if this is a ritual suicide or murder here, but seeing words like infidel and heretic carved into the hull, as well as reading documents talking about taking care of the non-believers once and for all, has me thinking that, alien influence or no, this has been on their mind for quite a while. So how does this piece of work fit into all of it? Well, that's a little vague, at least not without diving into some wikis. We know that he, like most people, was granted visions from the marker, and being an evangelical unitologist, believed this was a holy message and a sign of the great convergence that would see humanity united and reborn as something greater. We also know just by looking at his room that he was experimenting on necromorph genetic material and bodies that were found on the colony. In short, if a finger can be pointed at any one person for this whole mess, well, it's probably this guy. Of course, the way he sees it, this is all necessary and indeed desirable. Like most religions, unitology is fixated on death and some supposed greater reward that exists beyond it, and that fixation is so strong that actual lives going on here and now are considered lesser to hypothetical rewards in some unknown and unknowable space beyond death. In short, he's a piece of self-righteous shit who has decided to make a bad situation worse and justifies his actions at every turn with his beliefs. So, Dahlia, Wesker, Mother Miranda, Claudia, the entire hierarchy of Yevon on Spira, the Church of Granus and Grandia, and an uncountable number of real-world comparisons that leave me wondering how we still allow any of this to keep happening. Unitology is certainly one of the more interesting things we learn about as we stomp around the ship, dismembering its former crew, but we also get a hint of what life might be like on the Ishimura in general. Space travel is a truly fascinating thing. A while ago, I read a wonderful piece of speculative science fiction called Project Hail Mary that deals with a crewed mission to another star system using technology not all that more advanced than what we have now. Oh, and there's also first contact with an alien who's this awesome little mechanic who speaks in whale song. Big recommend. Anyway, one of the more difficult problems we have facing any kind of real deep space exploration is, well, space. Given that every gram of weight you add to a spaceship adds to its fuel cost, and fuel also has its own weight to add into the equation, spaceships aren't exactly going to be very comfortable. One challenge facing getting a crew of 3 people to Mars and back is, how do you stop them killing each other after several months of living in each other's pockets with nothing but a cold vacuum outside and very low prospects of a safe return? Now, the Ishimura exists in a hypothetical future where singularity cores create an unspecified but no doubt massive amount of energy and faster than light travel as possible. Even so, there has to be an upper limit to that. And it's quite clear that, while there's plenty of toilets on the Ishimura, deep space mining is somewhat akin to living on an offshore rig. So you're spending months in a compressed metal trap, sleeping in a bunk, sharing a common room, eating whatever is prepared for you, and only, seemingly, having some zero-G basketball to help take your mind off things. On top of that, at least in the case of the Ishimura, any rational-minded person is going to be massively outnumbered by evangelical alien worshippers. And when you look at the luxury the officers get compared to the rank and file, well, I'm surprised mutiny isn't a regular event. We learn so much about this world, this strange religion, and even the corporate powers that orchestrate this whole disaster through their illegal mining, just by walking around the ship. Similar to Half-Life, Dead Space almost never takes control away from the player. It may force us to walk and lock doors around us during certain communications, but it never makes us stop. The tale of the Ishimura and its cult-like crew being sent on this secret mission to recover an object of religious significance, the subsequent necromorph outbreak, the desperate struggle to survive, to hold the line, and the regret and slow descent into madness of all the survivors, it is written all around us. It is something we absorb as we explore, and this is one of my favorite ways to experience any game narrative. UI might not seem like the most glamorous place to start talking about a game. Indeed, I suspect in the case of a lot of games, its entire development is something that's left until the very end, with simple text boxes being used to show that features are working correctly at the start. These are then swapped out for something a little flashier later. This is actually why we need to take a look in depth at Dead Space's UI, because it's clearly something that was developed with the player experience in mind, versus something added at the end to make the game work. Immersion is a huge part of the Dead Space experience, and as such the developers wanted you taken out of the game as little as possible. This means that all of the UI elements actually exist within the game, and are something your character can actually see, and not just something that exists for the convenience of the player. This is not the only way to do UI well, of course. Games like Persona 5 with its hyper-stylish visuals and quick keys for every menu option, or RE4's legendary Hitachi briefcase, are all great ways to handle it, but this one is certainly unique. So, as you can see, running around we are hit with all these little UI elements informing us on what we're picking up, or instructing us on how to interact with certain things. They come in the form of these holograms that Isaac is clearly getting fed to him via his helmet, which I'm guessing has some kind of augmented reality interface that interacts with all the doors and items around him. And you might think, wow, that's a pretty convenient way to engage with the world. At least until you realize these systems are probably used mostly for advertising, and that most of these seemingly helpful little item and data holograms are actually trying to sell him something. Don't believe me? Well, all these things and more are available in the shop.
What are you buying?
Dead Space opts for a considerably less charming version of the in-game merchant than RE4's gun guy, or the living legend that is, the Duke, and instead has trade handled through the ultimate vending machine system that even has a built-in suit upgrade system that you can just hop into and let it take a blowtorch to you. Though why anyone would think that's safe on a ship that's being torn apart by the undead is anyone's guess. Especially after we get a first-hand look at what happens when one of them is, shall we say, mishandled. While you'll never actually run out of ammo, at least not on a normal difficulty playthrough, the shop is where you top up supplies for your preferred weapons, buy upgrades for said gear, and also store your stuff similar to the Resident Evil storage boxes. This makes a lot more sense in a science fiction game where ships the size of the Ishimura go careening around the universe at faster than light speeds. They probably have a system similar to Star Trek's transporters or replicators for it. If that makes you ask why aren't we using that to transport people around the ship, well, maybe look up the science behind exactly how those transporters work, and more specifically, why they most likely will never work in real life. Actually, can we just pause here? Am I the only one who's seeing a massive missed opportunity for a licensed Star Trek game along these lines? They could use the Borg or some new existential threat from some other quadrant and set it on a Starfleet ship. You could have safe houses where the emergency medical hologram heals you up and then complains about you not turning him off. I'm sure it could work. The bench is the other major feature of the UI, and is the closest we come to staring at a computer screen because that's exactly what Isaac is doing. Here we handle our weapon and armor upgrades by spending a very limited currency called power nodes. Most of these upgrades are only small increments, but by the end of the game, even with the enemies getting tougher, you do start to feel the increase in power you have on your preferred weapons. The Ishimura is a big ship. So big in fact, it even has its own monorail system to help ferry crew members around it. A lot of our objectives in the game are basically trying to stop the ship from tearing itself apart. Whether it be a decaying orbit threatening to pull the ship down to the planet below, an asteroid field that needs the defensive guns calibrated to be fended off, a communications array that's been sabotaged and is completely useless, or this thing hanging onto the ship's hull like a giant tick. Isaac is spending as much time doing his main job as he is his necromorph dismembering side hustle. It would be very easy to lose track of where you are and where you need to get to in a space this big. Forcing players to check their map and plan their routes may have the benefit of making them memorize the ship's layout long term, but it would be kind of a slog and likely immersion breaking. Likewise, a persistent goal marker, like those that are the bane of just about any game these days, would be equally annoying. So Dead Space has this cool little light that Isaac can drop from his hand, and then goes shooting off in the direction he needs to go, trailing a light tail behind it. This is a pretty good compromise for an objective marker, I'd say, as it's very useful but not invasive or even gamey at all. I mean, there's no way Isaac is expected to have the layout of every ship he gets assigned to work on memorized, so it makes sense that he'd have something in his suit to help him navigate to where he's needed to do his job as efficiently as possible. Dead Space has, without a doubt, some of the most intense and satisfying combat of basically any action game I've ever played. Like Gears of War and Devil May Cry before it, and Doom Eternal after, sorta. Dead Space has its 5 seconds of fun on repeat, and leads you from set piece to set piece, building up the tension and pressure all the way with various climaxes that leave you with your jaw hanging open while you just try to form the words,
Did I just do that?
Well, definitely with my assistance.
I did not just do that.
We did.
Make no mistake, Dead Space knows exactly what it is and expresses itself perfectly through its mechanics. It introduces new features in a safe and manageable way, lets you play around with them and slowly builds the pressure, keeping you in a persistent state of anxiety until you reach a point of near godlike proficiency that sees you reacting to what's on screen and all the various audio cues it's been conditioning you to react to, swapping weapons on the fly, and quite literally, surgically dismembering the various threats in front of you, before delivering one of Isaac's hull-breaching stomps to their bloated, decomposing bodies, just to vent your frustration at the sheer audacity of the average Necromorph for thinking it had any chance of being anything more than a mild annoyance to your progress. Oh, and boss fights? Yeah, Dead Space nails them too. There's only a couple of these, with the Hunter Necromorph having a kind of nemesis role, showing up at several different points to be a problem for you, and you needing to employ something in your surroundings to decommission it. Under most circumstances, I loathe the idea of boss fights that depend on mob spawns to divert your attention from the main enemy. But the thing is, Dead Space is about surviving hordes of ravenous Necromorphs. The combat is at its best when you feel like you're only moments away from being completely swarmed and overwhelmed. So juggling all that and trying to line this thing up with a rocket thruster feels like a natural progression of the gameplay loop. Our other big one is this thing, which isn't actually all that challenging but makes use of the zero-G control scheme and is more about the spectacle of taking on something so absurdly big than anything else. Both of these are big wins, and yes, I like the final boss too. It's a little too simple to figure out, but I'd say it's a fitting climax to everything we've waded through up to this point. I imagine Dead Space is very high on people's lists of games they'd like wiped from their memories so they can play them for the first time again. The horror element of Dead Space comes from the sense of being surrounded and watched with every step you take. The Ishimura had a crew of over 1,000 people, and if we assume that even half of them had been transformed at this point, well, that's a lot of potential threats waiting to burst out of a vent and try to induct you into their exclusive club. My first playthrough was, for this very reason, more than a little stressful, and I found myself having to play the game in short bursts, running between save points or objectives, then coming up for air for a couple of hours before diving back in to see what's next. It's fine for a game like Dead Space, or Sekiro as another example, to actually cause players to quit and go touch some grass, providing they've dug their hooks into you deep enough to pull you back every time. And Dead Space had its hooks in me up to its decomposing elbows, and pulled me back down into the dark with ease. The second playthrough though, well, because I was capturing for this video, I opted to neither play the New Game Plus or crank the difficulty. I'll do that for a third run for sure though, but yeah. A lot of that tension just wasn't there this time. The game had done such a good job of teaching me how to deal with it that the second playthrough had much more of a power fantasy vibe. Fun for sure, but, well, I think you know how I feel. If not for this game then, I know you've got one in mind just like it. Actually, you know what? Let me know in the comments which game it is. That sounds like fun. The crux of Dead Space's combat is explained by the game's most useful memo that we come across only inches away from the iconic plasma cutter. Surgical dismemberment. At some point during the Ishimura's descent into madness, or the rapture depending on who you ask, the survivors realized that the only way to truly incapacitate and defeat the Necromorphs was to disarm them, and while they're at it, disleg them as well. It's actually not known if this kills them, they simply stop moving, which may be the best we can ask for. As such, the majority of Dead Space's weapons are actually ship or mining tools, specifically those with an emphasis on cutting, repurposed into weapons with the goal of dismembering enemies, with the first and best of these being the plasma cutter. Borrowing heavily from Resident Evil 4's over-the-shoulder control scheme, you hold the left trigger to aim and press the right trigger to fire, with the right shoulder button letting you use the alternate fire mode for the weapon, which, usually, is something far more devastating that consumes a lot more ammo in the process. We start with our trusty plasma cutter. However, we have 4 active weapon slots for quick swapping weapons. You are welcome to carry more, but since opening your inventory doesn't pause the game, you're going to have a hard time busting them out in the middle of a heated Necromorph engagement. Man, whatever happened to this? Weapons you don't want to use at the moment can be stored in the shop's inventory. The second weapon we come across is the pulse rifle, which is the only one of these that's a weapon by design, and it's a real workhorse. I actually got a lot more mileage on this playthrough out of the explosive secondary fire for crowd control, but it was more or less permanently slotted into my quick loadout. Later we get the Ripper, which I can't imagine this actually being useful for anything to do with mining. I think it would have made more sense if some mad bastard had repurposed some other tool into this device of Necromorph death, but whatever. The utility of the primary fire on this baby for crowd control, providing everything is in front of you that is just too good to really pass this over for something else. The same really goes for the Flamer, which was my go-to for dealing with all the annoying little enemies that swarm you, and for some reason stop you from shooting once they've latched themselves onto you. It also comes in handy for these tentacle corpse things that just keep spawning these other annoying things. You don't really want to waste time precisely severing all the tentacles because while these little guys don't do a lot of damage, it does start to add up. The alternate fire speaks loudly to these guys, to say the least. The other weapons are the contact beam, which is a focused beam of energy and a good alternative to the flamethrower, the gravity gun that does, things, and the line gun that's kind of a super wide beam plasma cutter with a pretty cool booby trap alternate fire. I used these weapons a lot less overall, and didn't even have them in my inventory for a lot of the game. They're fine, but I had such a good thing going with my main 4 that I figured, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. While the inventory space is generous enough for you to keep weapons you're not using to hand, you should consider that ammo drops are procedurally generated, and what you have in your inventory influences the percentage chance of what drops. So keeping extra weapons to hand just in case means you're more likely to get ammo for them too, whereas if you don't have them in your inventory, you'll just get ammo drops for your main 4. Dead Space isn't a survival horror game. There isn't really any limited resource management in there, and at least on normal difficulty, the game will supply you with a steady stream of ammo and credits so as not to leave you lacking in the middle of a fight. Still, Isaac's arsenal isn't just limited to what he holds in his oh-so-talented hands. The environment is very much one of the best weapons in the game, once you have the power to really exploit it, that is. There are 2 suit upgrades that are found early in the game. These are the status module and the telekinesis module. I was pretty thrilled when I got the TK module at first, until I realized that the applications for it I was thinking of were from that other space horror game that came out a little before this one. Never mind though, this still rocks. The cryo module is your best friend for crowd control and dealing with these large brute monsters that act as kind of mini bosses at various points in the game. I hands down love their reveal, by the way. Telekinesis is all about hurling everything you can at your enemies, from boxes to blades to those all too common explosive canisters, to severed necromorph limbs that can stun or even damage anything that gets in their way. So the combat loop basically involves quite a lot of what I like to call Doom 3 bullshittery. That is to say, you take 2 steps forward and something pops in behind you. Or maybe something leaps through a vent in front of you, and while you're lining up your shots on that one, something else is coming up behind you. And I get it. Necromorphs do seem to have this pack hunter and ambush hunter instinct. But in terms of actually enjoying the game, this is one thing I could have used a little less of, and even led to me cheesing a couple of areas because it just became so predictable. What I mean is, ambushes and surprise attacks are okay, but if it's every single combat, then they're not ambushes or surprise attacks, they're just attacks. Imagine if every window you walk past in the Spencer Mansion had dogs jump through it. Actually, no, don't do that to yourself. You don't deserve that. Once you can actually see all your enemies though, your job is prioritizing threats, using status to slow down fast movers, and using large explosive attacks on dangerous groups of enemies that are bunched together. Finally, you need to amputate or immolate those stragglers. Stop, take a breath, and wait for it all to come around again. Occasionally Dead Space will contrive to shake things up with walks in 0G or into areas without atmosphere. Isaac's suit is pressurized, and he has access to a limited amount of oxygen that he has to refill at various stations, or from canisters that I honestly don't think I ever used. The big thing with 0G is that you can very quickly lose any sense of up or down, and enemies can be approaching you from any angle. Going out into the vacuum adds the extra pressure of a time limit, and also all but removes audio cues for you to rely on to track down enemies. I appreciate that these mechanics were used sparingly because, while they are fine in short bursts, I could absolutely see them becoming tedious if they were overused. So, as I said, it's intense and incredibly satisfying, and I have basically nothing else negative to say about it. Oh wait, yeah, the game has sticky floors that force you to walk. Well, that's it then, 0 out of 10, worst game ever. Sorry, I'm just full of bad jokes today, aren't I? They're not that big of a problem, as they are fairly infrequent and easy to spot, but I just feel at this point that developers should know that this shit isn't fun. It wasn't fun in Lords of Shadow, it wasn't fun in Doom Eternal, and it wasn't fun in any FromSoft game ever. It's just a bad idea. I know this is a remake, and the team are trying to keep everything from the original intact, but if there's one thing that could have been cut, one thing that we just know better about now, it's this. Okay, that's a really small gripe, and if that's the best I can do at picking faults with this game, then I'd say we're on to a winner. I know I'm about to dip my hand into the fire here, and for all you hardcore OG Dead Space lovers out there who'll fight me until the heat death of the universe, I totally get it. There is an expression some of you may know that says simply that your first Elder Scrolls is always your best. For me, that's Morrowind. Let's go ahead and ignore that low-hanging fruit right there this time, and say diplomatically that Bethesda's game design has come under some harsh criticism recently. So while I could and probably one day will present a compelling case for why Morrowind does many things better than Oblivion or Skyrim, I also understand that nostalgia and the memory of who I was and what I was doing with my life at that time is a big part of why this is my favourite. There's also the fact that Morrowind started my interest in 3D modelling and making mods for games, and that's something that has developed into a long-term passion and led to me trying to make my own games even now. Then there's those old Elder Scrolls forums, which was probably one of the first online communities I really became a part of. All of these things shaped my views about the game, and stimulate just the right chemicals in my brain when I hear that old intro music. But could I honestly recommend this game with its blocky 3D graphics, low texture resolution, terrible draw distance, loading times, and really bad combat to someone half my age, who at best knew only about Skyrim and at worst Dark Souls? Well, not without installing a lot of mods first, and certainly not that awfully optimized Xbox port. Now, I'm not here to shit on original Dead Space in any way, shape or form. I played it. It's fine. Great even. But I needed to answer a question, if only for myself, as to whether or not it needed a remake. While Dead Space Remake absolutely stands on its own legs, I wanted to know if it also justifies its existence in this area too. Hence this comparison, and its emphasis on the original's shortcomings more than anything else. So let's just get a big one out of the way right now, and yes, this is an opinion, one I'm going to try and back up, but I also know this is one that could start a fire. Isaac is a better character, and makes more sense when he talks. I know, imagine someone saying that about Gordon Freeman, right?
when you put it that way. You and your marker can go to hell.
But first, Gunnar Wright is just on form this whole game with his performance, even with the somewhat limited number of lines he has. He just has this everyman in the wrong place at the wrong time absolutely nailed. Almost like he's done this before, huh? But narratively it works better too. I know that when the silent protagonist seems to ignore everyone talking to them, we're supposed to fill those voids with our own voice. But the first time it happened in the OG game, it was really jarring. More so though, Isaac in the OG game feels much more along for the ride, as he's being bossed around by everyone, told where to go and what to do, and not taking any initiative for himself. And sure, that's because how else can you do that with a silent protagonist? Isaac in the remake though, is very proactive. He is an engineer after all. Even during the opening crash, he's shouting out ideas to help save lives. He's making choices and throwing out suggestions all through the game. He's not just being thrown around by the plot, he's reacting to things, improvising and taking charge, and that just makes him a way more compelling character in my mind. This Isaac, to me, is very pragmatic. He's not a hero, but he's not a pushover who's going to roll over and let the Ishimura eat him alive. Things like stepping up to the Leviathan are born out of a need to survive. His back's against the wall, and what else can he do?
Well, I'm all out of good ideas, so guess what's left?
So yeah, that's one big point right there. As someone who played the remake first, I honestly think that this is the better Isaac, and I really struggled going back to the silent Isaac in the OG. So let's talk visuals. I'm generally of the impression that many of the games from this time hold up visually just fine even now. Hell, the best of the PS2 era still does. So there's no denying that the PC version of the game running at 1080p is a damn fine thing, but opening it up after playing the remake, I could see that my perception of what graphics for that generation were like was just a little off, to say the least. Studying this with a critical eye, you can immediately tell that the meshes are much lower poly, the textures are low resolution, and this was a good time before PBR shading was brought to games, so glossiness is just being faked and metal doesn't really look like metal. It's not bad. In fact, some of the scenes in this game are gorgeous. But things like that first walk onto the Ishimura just don't have the same sense of scale in the original, and man is the lighting different here. Lighting is one of the most important things in most level design, but especially horror. Dead Space Remake is a dark game, with a lot of high contrast shadows, while the original is much brighter, and overall feels a lot more washed out. It's not a total failure. There are some areas where the lighting really sells the atmosphere, but overall, I just felt like this was better than this. Looking around the ship, there's also just a lot less clutter to be seen. This is no doubt down to polycount budgets on older consoles being much tighter, but it gives the Ishimura an overall more sterile and less lived-in feeling than the remakes. Then there's sound design. This is an area where I'd say they're both pretty equal. Each game has things that they do better than the other, but it balances out overall. Controls, however, are where Dead Space Remake has the original hands down beaten. In the original, Isaac feels very floaty and slower to react overall. Like, I feel like I'm floating around the corridor while an animation plays to give the impression of running. And yes, that is exactly how movement works in a game, but you're not supposed to notice it. Isaac in the remake feels heavier, and seems to be affected by the physics of the world around him. These snappier controls are further enhanced by the thundering stomp of his boots on the metal surfaces of the ship's hull. And speaking of stomping, oh damn does this feel so much more satisfying in the remake than the original. The upgrades to Isaac's movement in both controls and animations is almost enough to justify the existence of the remake all by itself, but there are also significant improvements to the combat that just makes this version of the game so much more fun to play. Combat in the original game is fine, but the remake just has that, but better. Thanks to smoother animations, tighter controls, and all the benefits that come from years of hindsight and improvements to games as a whole, the remake just does such a better job of capturing that sense of desperation that you feel as hordes of Necromorphs mob you, giant tentacles try to flatten you, And you juggle all of that, swapping out your weapons, prioritizing targets, and just going to town on these things. Oh, and Zero G? Yeah, the less we say about the original's take on Zero G, the better. I have to wonder if this was a choice wrought from engine limitations at the time, because the first time I had to use this system to fight, I said, no thank you, and peaced out of the room as quickly as possible. My point is, Dead Space is a solid B+, and the remake is a resounding A+. No game needs a remake exactly. Just because some games have shortcomings doesn't mean they aren't wonderful products of their era. But I think we all got something great out of this remake. Whether you're returning after a long break, or stepping into this for the first time, there's something there for everyone to love. Okay, and one more thing. It's tacked on the end here because, A, I wasn't sure if I wanted to bring it up because it's very dumb, and
B? But I don't need a B because the A was so great.
You see, there's this place called Twitter, where around 300 million of the 8 billion people who live on this planet choose to spend their time for various reasons. Of that very small percentage of the world's population, there is a subsect of people there specifically to talk gaming. Please follow me for almost 0 tweets. And of that group, there's an even smaller subsect that just want to scream about everything they don't like. They seem like a large number because they scream so loud, and get their screams boosted by disingenuous clickbait media looking for clicks so they can advertise to you. As such, the changes of design in one particular character got these very sensitive and easily triggered people in an uproar because apparently they don't understand anything about art direction, aesthetic design, or maybe even what a real woman actually looks like. I'm not going to look down my nose at people who are into 3D game characters. I myself am very infatuated with Ada Wong, but screaming about decisions that were very carefully thought out by a team of art directors and 3D artists who no doubt tested several different looks in the game engine before deciding on which one to go with, as pushing an unspecified agenda of a shadowy conspiratorial group of whose motives are, I have no idea, is unimaginably ignorant. This is an EA game. The only shadowy cabal here are the executives looking to make money off of hard-working creative developers, and they aren't pushing any agenda except their stock price. More importantly though, anyone who complained about this is wrong because damn, this version of Nicole is way hotter than this nearly anime Barbie girl we've got here. So yeah, score another big win for the remake. Okay, so you know the drill by now. It's time to talk endgame spoilers. I don't always bring these up unless there's some large thematic reason to do so, and if I'm being honest, I'm not sure if this even qualifies because, number one, it really isn't that big of a twist, in the sense that it is really easy to see coming, and number two, it's not like on a replay it has any considerable impact on how you experience the game. Maybe a little, but again, it's far too telegraphed to really be impactful. Either way, if you're sticking around past this point, then you're all in. Otherwise, I'll see you in the conclusion. The revelation that Nicole is dead and that Isaac has just been experiencing a lot of hallucinations that have maneuvered him into doing exactly what the hive mind wants isn't that big of a shock. I mean, it's obvious that everyone on the ship was having their head messed with in one way or another by the red marker. And it gets into Zach's head, and this is the reason behind his untimely demise. Zach, no! So we've no reason to believe that Isaac is in any way immune to this, and we see signs of it with increasing frequency as the game continues. Certainly we can conclude from their interactions that something is at least a little off with Nicole when we do meet her. I've looked at these scenes playing out in the original and they are a little more subtle overall, but not by a great measure.
You'll put things back the way they were and make us whole again.
Kendra being a government agent and the red marker actually being something humans developed and hid on Aegis 7 is a bit more of an interesting twist. On a replay we can at least see how she tries to sow doubt between Isaac and Zach, presumably hoping to play the boys off against each other while she makes her escape off the ship with the marker. That part is at least pretty cool, and it says a lot about Isaac that he'd still try to save her at the very end if only to have one less death to come out of this whole colossal mess. Still, you'd think a government super spy would know about the remote control recall on a shuttlecraft. We can also assume that Kendra intercepted Nicole's communication and edited off the end, so that Isaac would be in the dark as to what he was getting himself into. This certainly makes more sense than he just repressed it and refused to watch the end again after that. So, yeah. This was kinda short, huh? I was expecting to have more to say on the topic other than it's fine, I guess. The final scene where we see that even with the marker destroyed, something is still wrong with Isaac, feels more like American horror movie final jump scare ending stuff than anything else. I know this is something that has a larger meaning for the series, but I'd say it was overall unnecessary and a little tacky. Just give the guy a moment of peace and let all the grief he's been accumulating find him. As complaints go though, these are minor, and they don't take away anything from the game at all. Sure, they could have done something more interesting, but this is fine. I think it should be obvious at this point that I had an absolutely wild time with Dead Space Remake, and I think it's both an incredible game and an incredible remake. Anyone like me who, for whatever reason, is discovering this for the first time should absolutely choose this as their first point of contact. It's not only a fantastic game, but a well thought out and executed upgrade of the original. Trust me, if you play this version, not only will you not be missing out on anything that was in that game, you'll also be getting an overall better version of everything that is in it. Everything from the presentation to the execution of the story and the mechanics just feels smoother and sexier. This remake was clearly crafted with both love and respect for the original and its fans, as well as becoming a point of access for many new players that are going to go on their first adventure into this world and meet all its interesting characters. So, consider this a big recommendation. Dead Space Remake is an awesome time, and is 100% the standard by which all remakes coming from now on will be judged. Well guys, I know it's February, which means we're not too far from my birthday now, but since it's still cold outside and I'm slowing down production here just a bit, would you permit me a little time to talk about another game that I played over the holiday season? This one was an odd little experience that I have something of a love-hate relationship with. That is to say, the good parts are really good, and the bad parts suck so much ass. Also, the name of the developer, Bloober Team, well, let's just say it incites some very emotional reactions these days. So let's dive into a retro cyberpunk world, explore a rundown apartment full of weird and wonderful characters, and try to solve a murder spree by invading the minds of the victims as we take on the role of Daniel Lazarski, the Observer. Well, hello and welcome to the end of the video. It's been quite a turbulent month for me, and I've had some bad work-related news recently. I'll bounce back, but it was a bit of a shock when I found out. In other news though, I've been playing a lot of Freelancer recently, and I'm definitely doing a video on this banger later in the year. And I've been working as best I can to create the systems I want for an Unreal Engine game. I was planning to do something horror-based initially, that is, until I figured out how to do pre-rendered backgrounds. It's games like Resident Evil and Final Fantasy VII that first got me excited about the idea of making games, and it's where my love of pre-rendered backgrounds comes from. But the worlds I imagined creating back then were much less horrific and much more fantastical. So I'm hoping to start building out a fantasy adventure game with a bit of an isekai story attached to it. Sort of Grim Fandango with maybe a dark world where there are some kind of enemies and a fail state, but I'm still not 100% sure. I'm just starting on the art for the opening scenes, so maybe there'll be a little more to show by the time the next video drops. Finally, I turned 42 on the 1st of March. I've already picked up a couple of books off Amazon as presents for myself, and this one in particular is quite the banger. Anyway, my friends and fellow game appreciators, I'd say that's it from me for now. Leave me a comment if you like the video. I don't know, something stupid like, it's Dead Space time, so I know you made it to the end. Until next time though, peace out my friends.